At its core, this story is about justice, identity, and poetic retribution. It's a dramatic unveiling of hidden power, resilience in the face of systemic disrespect, and the reversal of assumptions made by those blinded by prejudice. This tale explores the theme of redemption and reckoning, but not for the protagonist, for those who underestimated her. It's a modern morality story where the victim turns out to be the authority, and the oppressors find themselves judged by the very woman they tried to demean. The narrative focuses on a Black woman who enters a courtroom dressed modestly, quiet, and composed. Her presence is mistaken for weakness. She is ridiculed and dismissed by officers and attorneys alike, but they don't know who she really is, the newly appointed district attorney. What follows is a masterclass in controlled power, as she flips the courtroom dynamics in a way no one saw coming. The genre blends legal drama with a social commentary thriller, making it emotionally rich and tension-filled. The story builds anticipation with psychological nuance, touching deeply on themes like racism, classism, and authority. Vindication through tension and suspense. The story is laced with discomfort, rising indignation, and finally, sweet satisfaction when the protagonist reveals her true identity. Readers should feel the tension of injustice, the pain of humiliation, and the thrill of retribution when the scales of justice tilt in favor of the woman who was mocked. The title draws immediate attention through contrast, a mocked Black woman versus her secret identity as the district attorney. It piques curiosity. How did no one know? Why was she treated that way? And what happens next? This story promises a twist of fate, a reversal of power, and a satisfying comeuppance for those who judge too quickly. It challenges societal biases and gives power to the underdog in a way that feels both righteous and emotionally cathartic. The courtroom was buzzing, not with tension, but with laughter. Whispered jokes danced between police officers lined up along the wall, like gossiping children who thought they wouldn't get caught. She lost. Must be here for a parking ticket. One officer snorted. Another chuckled, more like child support. You know how these people are. The woman they were talking about didn't flinch. She stood still, her posture poised like a queen cloaked in humility. A simple navy blue suit. Natural curls tucked into a neat bun. No designer bag. No courtroom entourage. Just presence. And presence they failed to recognize. Judge Halverson adjusted his glasses, looking over the rim with mild annoyance as he scanned the room. Who's the prosecution in this case? Still silence. Then, heels clicking on the tile floor. 4 precise steps forward. I am. Her voice was low but commanding. Not loud, not aggressive, just final. The laughter stopped. A pin-drop hush swallowed the courtroom. Detective Walsh, the one who had been smirking the loudest, narrowed his eyes. Excuse me, what? She didn't blink. She looked him directly in the eye. I said, I am the prosecutor. District Attorney Natalia Morrison. Gasps. One of the interns standing near the back nearly dropped her iPad. The judge's brow arched so high, it nearly disappeared into his receding hairline. District Attorney Morrison? He repeated, the skepticism dripping from his words like venom. She reached into her coat pocket and calmly handed over her credentials. Appointed last week. Confirmed 2 days ago. You might have missed the email, Your Honor. He took the card, looked at it, and then looked at her as though someone had replaced the woman before him with an entirely different person. Meanwhile, the same officers who had been cracking jokes just moments ago began to shift uncomfortably. One of them adjusted his belt. Another cleared his throat. Detective Walsh, still frozen, searched her face for some clue, some mistake, anything to explain away the reality now slapping him across the face. But she wasn't there to give them peace. She was there for truth. She walked to the prosecutor's table, placing her folder down with the kind of elegance that comes from having to work twice as hard to be half as respected. She opened it without rushing. Every motion calm, measured, deadly. As she spoke, her tone remained even. Today, we're here to review charges against Officer Mark Holloway for excessive force during a domestic call that ended in the wrongful arrest of an unarmed woman and the hospitalization of her 8-year-old son. Dead silence. Detective Walsh shifted again. That was his case. Judge Halverson looked over the file. His voice cracked slightly. Proceed. D.A. Morrison looked up once more, her voice turning sharp as steel. Oh, I will. The courtroom no longer buzzed. No more jokes. No more smugness. Only the sound of justice unfolding, and it had never sounded so much like thunder. Natalia Morrison was not born in silk. Her roots were tangled in concrete. Raised in a two-bedroom apartment on the south side of Atlanta, where sirens were lullabies and broken streetlights taught children how to be shadows. She was 32 now, a district attorney. But to understand her power, you had to understand the path, the cracked pavement she rose from. Her mother, Clarice, worked double shifts as a nurse and still managed to braid Natalia's hair every morning before school. Her father? Gone before she could spell his name. But Clarice never let the absence feel like a hole. "You're whole all by yourself, baby," she'd say. "Don't let the world tell you otherwise." By the time Natalia turned 10, she was reading court case transcripts she found at the local library instead of watching cartoons. Words like misdemeanor, arraignment, plaintiff became her playground. While other kids memorized dance moves, Natalia memorized legal definitions. School wasn't just an escape. It was her battleground. Teachers underestimated her. Students mocked her for speaking too proper. But Natalia learned early that when the world doesn't give you a seat, you build your own damn table. She graduated top of her class from Spelman College. Then came Harvard Law, where she spent 3 years surrounded by privilege she couldn't afford to envy. She'd sit in lecture halls filled with men in blazers whose last names opened doors she had to fight tooth and nail to knock on. But she held her own. Every debate, every mock trial. She didn't just win, she transformed the room. And still, even with a law degree hanging on her wall, even as she passed the bar on her first try, every courtroom she entered treated her like she didn't belong. But that only sharpened her. Behind the courtroom calm was a woman forged in fire. Trauma, racism, sexism, none of it broke her. It shaped her. She learned how to take pain and polish it into power. Her childhood wasn't just a memory, it was her fuel. And perhaps the deepest irony of all, before becoming DA, Natalia was a public defender. She stood beside the people no one wanted to represent. People who couldn't afford justice, whose faces reminded her of her brother Marcus, shot at 17 during a traffic stop. No charges were ever filed. The officer walked away clean. Marcus didn't walk at all. That was the crack in her soul that never healed. But she didn't want it to. That pain was a compass. It pointed her to this moment. Her struggle was not for her alone. That morning in court, she had arrived early, long before the jokes and the stares. She walked the courtroom aisle like a soldier surveying the field. Her heels echoed softly, each step a silent declaration. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." She carried no briefcase, just a folder of evidence and a voice trained to pierce through bias. And when she stood at that prosecutor's table, every insult, every doubter, every door that had ever been slammed in her face, they all stood behind her, no longer barriers but bricks in the foundation she stood upon. Natalia wasn't just a prosecutor. She was the reckoning no one saw coming. And though she wore the title district attorney, her real identity couldn't be reduced to a nameplate. She was the little girl who watched her brother bleed, the teenager who debated curfews with cops on the corner, the young woman who spent weekends tutoring black youth in neighborhoods others had abandoned. She was justice in heels, compassion wrapped in steel. And today, her past wasn't her shame, it was her sword. Because when she looked across the courtroom and saw the smirks vanish, when she watched the color drain from Detective Walsh's face, she didn't smile. She remembered Marcus. And she sharpened her voice. The courtroom was packed, but the silence could shatter glass. Natalia stood still at the prosecutor's table, her presence commanding yet calm. Across the room, Detective James Walsh leaned against the witness stand, arms folded, his badge glinting like armor. A veteran cop, graying at the temples, confident in his swagger, and certain that the courtroom was his kingdom. He didn't recognize her yet. Not fully. That would come. Today's case was a seemingly minor one. A young black man, 17, charged with resisting arrest and assaulting an officer. The officer was Walsh. The boy, Jalen Reed, had a busted lip and bruises up and down his ribcage. He sat silently beside his court-appointed attorney, hands trembling. Natalia flipped open the file in front of her, her face expressionless. But inside, her stomach turned. The details were familiar, too familiar. The arrest report said Jalen had lunged, tried to run, fought back. It painted him as wild, unpredictable, dangerous. But Natalia had seen the body cam footage, and what she saw made her blood boil. The footage wasn't public. It had been flagged during the evidence review process. Had she not personally requested all raw footage from the precinct, she never would have found it buried in a mislabeled drive. In the video, Jalen didn't resist. He didn't even speak. He stood quietly with his hands up, asking to call his mother. Walsh slammed him to the ground without warning. The boy's head hit the pavement. The screams that followed still echoed in Natalia's mind at night. And now that same officer sat in front of her, preparing to spin his version of the story, just like he had done countless times before. "Detective Walsh," she began, her voice smooth as satin. "You've served on the force for how long now?" He smirked, leaning into the microphone like it was a stage prop. 23 years. And in those 23 years, how many times have you been accused of using excessive force? His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Objection," Jalen's defense attorney called out. "Relevance." The judge looked over. "Ms. Morrison?" Natalia stepped forward slowly, deliberately. "Your Honor, I intend to establish a pattern of misconduct. The credibility of this witness is central to the case." There was a pause, a beat too long. Then the judge nodded. "Proceed." Walsh's confidence faltered, but only slightly. "I've had complaints," he admitted, "but none were sustained. You know how it is. People get arrested, they get angry." Natalia tilted her head. "Yes, but this one's different." She clicked a remote, and the monitor lit up with the body cam footage. The courtroom's eyes turned to the screen as the scene played. Gasps echoed through the room. The jury leaned forward. And Walsh turned to stone. There it was, plain and brutal. A teenage boy with his hands in the air. A calm voice. A sudden tackle. Then the sound of sobbing. Pleading. Blood on the sidewalk. The video ended. Natalia turned back to Walsh. "Did you forget your camera was on, detective?" He didn't respond. "Or did you think no one would ever see it?" His jaw clenched. But she wasn't done. She walked to the evidence table and placed another folder on it. "These," she said, "are 5 prior complaints filed against you by suspects who were all young, all black, and all unarmed. None of them resulted in charges against you. But now we have footage." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. One juror shook his head, eyes wide. The judge banged the gavel. "Order." But Natalia didn't flinch. She looked straight at Walsh and added, "I'm sure you don't recognize me, do you?" Now he squinted, really looking. And then it hit him. His face paled. "Natalia Morrison," she said slowly, walking back toward the table. "You arrested my brother. Marcus Morrison, 2009. The courtroom fell silent again. Walsh blinked. "I don't. You said he matched the description of a robbery suspect. You tackled him, handcuffed him, called for backup, said he resisted, said you feared for your life." She stepped closer. "He was unarmed. Walking home. You threw him to the ground and held your knee on his neck. He died before the ambulance arrived." Walsh opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I was 15, she whispered, "and I watched you walk away without a single consequence." The judge leaned forward, uneasy. "Ms. Morrison, is this? This is relevant, Your Honor," she said, eyes blazing. "Because justice denied then, is justice we must claim now." The silence that followed was sacred. Natalia turned to the jury. "This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. About a system that silences victims unless we force it to listen." And suddenly, the courtroom didn't feel like Walsh's kingdom anymore. It felt like hers. Jalen's mother wept softly in the back row. Even the court clerk stopped typing, her eyes glued to Natalia. The boy's hands had stopped shaking. Because for the first time, he realized someone powerful was on his side. And for Walsh, he wasn't looking so smug anymore. He looked exposed, small, cornered, exactly as Natalia intended. The courtroom emptied slowly that afternoon, but Natalia didn't leave right away. She sat at the prosecutor's table, silently gathering her papers, as the soft echoes of departing footsteps faded into the hall. The case wasn't over. The trial had just begun. But something had shifted in that room, and everyone had felt it. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Microphones, cameras, flashing bulbs, all aimed at the door. Natalia stepped into the sun, flanked by 2 associates. But when the crowd surged toward her, asking questions, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The footage had spoken louder than anything she could have said. Her silence was its own power. Back in her office later that evening, Natalia locked the door. She pulled out a dusty, black box from under the desk drawer. Inside were old newspaper clippings, a funeral program, a bloodstained shirt. Marcus Morrison, her older brother, her protector, her best friend. She traced a finger over his photo, her eyes softening for the first time all day. He had wanted to be a lawyer too. But life? No, the system had stolen that dream before it even had a chance. And now, Natalia carried that dream like a sword. She wasn't just fighting for Jalen. She was fighting for Marcus. For every forgotten name buried beneath statistics and silence. She opened her laptop and began compiling files, evidence, footage, prior reports, disciplinary records swept under the rug. She didn't just want to win this case. She wanted to expose a pattern, a chain of abuse with names and badge numbers. And she wasn't alone anymore. That night, her inbox lit up. From Devin Brooks. Subject: I'm ready to talk. She froze. Devin Brooks was a former officer. Retired early. Transferred out just months after Marcus's death. Rumor was, he had filed an internal complaint that mysteriously vanished. Natalia clicked the message. I remember what happened to your brother. I couldn't say anything back then. But I'm ready now. Meet me tomorrow. Discreetly. The address was a quiet cafe on the East End, not far from where Marcus had been arrested. Natalia exhaled deeply, heart pounding. She had waited 16 years for someone to come forward. Now someone had. The cafe was almost empty when she arrived. A young barista hummed softly while polishing mugs. Sunlight spilled across the tile floor. At the corner table, Devin Brooks sat wearing a worn-out hoodie and sunglasses. He stood as she approached. Natalia, he said, I never thought I'd see you again. She didn't smile. She nodded. You said you remember. He nodded back. I saw everything that day. Your brother didn't resist. He begged for his life. Walsh, he was out of control. I wrote a full report, but it disappeared before the review board saw it. Why didn't you come forward then? Devin sighed. I had 2 kids, a mortgage, and no backup. You speak up in that department, you disappear. You're already gone now, Natalia said flatly. I know. That's why I'm here. He pulled out a flash drive and slid it across the table. These are my original notes. Body cam footage I downloaded from another officer's camera. I made a copy the day after it happened. I've had it all these years. Natalia stared at the drive like it was radioactive. This wasn't just a piece of evidence. It was everything. She took it gently, tucking it into her coat. Thank you, she said. You just changed everything. Natalia's steps quickened down the marble hallway of the DA's office. She held the flash drive like a loaded weapon. Inside the conference room, she plugged it into her laptop. The footage loaded. Marcus, younger than she remembered, calm, holding a bag of groceries. He turned around when Walsh called out, raised his hands, said something, probably I live right there. And then, the tackle, the struggle, the chokehold. Natalia covered her mouth. Her eyes welled. This was it. Proof that Marcus hadn't resisted. Proof that the official report was a lie. She backed up the footage to 3 cloud servers. This would never disappear again. She called a press conference. Reporters packed the room. Microphones pointed like weapons. Flashes exploded. Natalia stood at the podium, firm and composed. 16 years ago, my brother Marcus Morrison died during an unlawful arrest, she began. For 16 years, there was no justice. Just silence, denial, and pain. She paused. But today that silence ends. She played the footage. There were gasps. A few reporters dropped their pens. This is the same officer currently under trial for assaulting another young man, Jalen Reed. This is a pattern, a culture of abuse. And it must stop. When the footage ended, Natalia's voice sharpened. We are opening a formal investigation into multiple prior cases involving Detective Walsh and his associates. Every file, every complaint, every life they destroyed without consequence. The press erupted into questions. Natalia didn't flinch. She had just lit a match in a room full of gas, and she wasn't afraid to watch it burn. By the time Natalia returned to the courtroom the next week, everything had changed. Public opinion was now on her side. Protesters held signs outside. Justice for Marcus. Justice for Jalen. The jury had seen the footage. Walsh's attorney requested a mistrial. The judge denied it. Natalia presented the flash drive as evidence. Devin Brooks testified under oath. One by one, old ghosts returned, victims who had never been heard before. And Walsh. His confidence had dissolved completely. He no longer smirked. He pleaded the fifth. The journey grows bigger. Natalia's battle was no longer just about one case. More families came forward. More officers under scrutiny. The city buzzed with conversations it had avoided for decades. She launched a task force, independent review of police misconduct. She started speaking at law schools, encouraging young women of color to rise in the ranks of justice. What began as vengeance had become something greater, a movement. She visited Marcus's grave one evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky. Placing her hand gently on the headstone, she whispered, "You were the beginning, but I'll be the end of what killed you." She stood, wind brushing her curls, and walked away, not as the grieving sister, but as the woman who turned pain into power. The courthouse was silent as the jury foreman stood, a folded paper in his hand. Natalia's heart pounded. The room felt like it held its breath. 6 weeks of testimony, video evidence, community protest, and relentless truth-telling had brought them to this moment. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Rowan looked over his glasses at the jurors. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" The foreman nodded. "We have, Your Honor." He handed the paper to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. Natalia's fingers curled into fists at her side. She glanced at Walsh. For the first time, he looked small, defeated. No badges, no swagger, just a man who could no longer outrun the truth. Judge Rowan unfolded the verdict and read, "In the matter of the state versus Richard Walsh, on the charge of aggravated assault, the jury finds the defendant guilty." The room exploded into gasps and tears. Natalia exhaled sharply, tears brimming in her eyes. But the judge wasn't finished. On the charge of official misconduct, the jury finds the defendant guilty. On the charge of falsifying a report, the jury finds the defendant guilty. One by one, the walls that protected men like Walsh crumbled. He slumped in his chair, stunned. Natalia remained still, composed. She wasn't celebrating. She was remembering. The 16 years of grief, the nights she cried alone, the promises she whispered at her brother's grave. This verdict wasn't just about Jalen Reed. It was for Marcus Morrison. As Natalia stepped outside, the city waited. The crowd erupted in applause. Cheers, tears, raised fists. Jalen's mother hugged Natalia, weeping openly. "You saved my son," she whispered. "No," Natalia replied. "He saved us all. His case made us look deeper. He stood up when it was hardest." A journalist pushed through. "Ms. Morrison, what's next for you?" Natalia smiled softly. "Next, we rebuild. We reform. We hold every system accountable. Justice isn't a destination, it's a practice. And we've just begun." Natalia stared out the window at the city skyline. The air was clearer now, or maybe it just felt that way. Her office door opened. It was the district attorney himself. "Natalia," he said, "you've done more than win a case. You've changed the department." She looked at him, curious. "We're creating a new civil rights division, and I want you to lead it." Natalia blinked, surprised. "You'll have full autonomy," he continued. "To investigate, to prosecute, to rebuild trust. You've earned this." Natalia thought of Marcus, of every person who never got their day in court. She nodded slowly. "I accept." 1 month later, she returned to the neighborhood where it all began. The corner store was still there. So was the park. And the mural, Marcus's mural, now freshly painted with flowers and golden rays. Kids played nearby, laughing, alive. Natalia placed fresh sunflowers by the mural's base. Her eyes lingered on Marcus's face, immortalized in color and light. She whispered, "We did it." Just then, a girl tugged on her coat. "You're that lawyer, right? The one who beat the cops." Natalia knelt. "I'm Natalia." The girl smiled. "I want to be like you." Natalia touched her hand. "You'll be even better. Sometimes, the fight chooses you. Sometimes, the pain they gave you becomes the fire that fuels your rise." Natalia Morrison didn't just walk into that courtroom to win a case. She walked in with the ghosts of injustice behind her and walked out a giant. From forgotten daughter to fearless warrior. From grieving sister to protector of the people. Her story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about power. It's about never letting them write your ending for you. Because when you know who you are, when you remember where you come from, you don't just fight back. You lead the charge.